Well, thanks very much. So it's great to be with you this evening, and I've given sort of similar talks to Father's Group, Mother's Group, so I've changed it a little bit this evening to speak to guys for whom it's kind of all ahead of you. So yes, I am the CEO of the Catholic Truth Society, a venerable Catholic publishing house which you may have come across. I'm also the master of the Catholic Writers Guild and various other bits and bobs. But for the purposes of this evening, I think the most important thing is that I'm one of 8 children of a Catholic family, and I'm the father of my own family. As you mentioned, we have 7 children with my wife Chiara, ages 23 down to 4. So kind of work, university, all the way down to kind of nursery and everything kind of in between. So we like to keep ourselves busy. And I think the first thing that I wanted to say is that my parents both came from kind of broken or troubled families. And they eventually made an intentional choice to start something new. A family which placed God at the center. Our own children, so we kind of carried on that intentionality when we started our own family with Chiara. One of our eldest son was married in July. And this is fresh news. We're soon to be grandparents as well. But I'm under no illusion that because 25 years into our marriage, all our children are enthusiastic Catholics, that will necessarily continue. It ain't over until it's over, and that goes for all of us, me included. Yet there are kind of real consolations. It is possible, even in the environment within which we live, to create something beautiful, a Catholic family. I was at a funeral today of a wonderful man in our parish in Catford in southeast London. 50 years married, 4 children, all pillars of their respective parishes. 29 grandchildren, 2 in seminary, 4 discerning religious life, and really a witness to what can be achieved in a life lived to the full and with the hierarchy of values clearly in place. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all other things will be given you as well. So let me begin with my own observations, born of the experience of being both a son and a father, and maybe I'll come back with my thoughts as a grandfather at some point as well. Every year around this time, the WhatsApp group I have with my siblings is full of our hot takes on the latest Christmas adverts from our national retailers. A good ad captures the warmth, generosity, and goodwill that even now in a secularized, commercialized Britain still lies at the heart of the Christmas season. Some ads do it better, others worse, but that's the general thrust of what we always consider to be a good one. I don't know if any of you have seen this year's offering from Marks and Spencer's, but it is a pure distillation of where we have gone wrong as a society. Scenes of wholesome traditional Christmas activities, decorations, board games, Christmas cards, family fun are systematically and respectively thrown away, burnt, shredded and destroyed by pampered celebrities, while the husky M&S voiceover affirms this orgy of iconoclastic destruction in the name of individualistic self-fulfillment. It's like you only have to do what you want to do. Yeah? Don't do any of this stuff, just do what you want to do. And children, for whom Christmas is, I hear, quite a big deal, are conspicuous by their absence. But M&S is only capturing and reinforcing the trends of the last few decades. When it comes to Gen Z and millennials, did I just say Gen Z? Sorry. When it comes to Gen Z and millennials, just under half have expressed the intention not to have any children at all. And the most common reason given, wanting time for themselves. So what can we do in the face of such selfishness? Well, we can do the opposite. We can spend ourselves as a gift. In the words of St. Paul, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. And not only are we called to transform ourselves, but to transform the world that is around us. Our times are overpopulated with people who want to clean up the world, but who won't clean up their rooms. So as Mother Teresa said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. So we need to start there. So why have a family in the first place? Well, to have a family is an act of obedience, an act of hope, and an act of generosity. Obedience because God commanded us to multiply and to be like Him, who is generous and creative. He loves us with a love that overspills the narrow limits of selfishness and creates something new. Hope because we have experienced the goodness and love of God, and we trust that God's arm has not become less powerful. So, as the psalmist says, one generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. Generosity because children call us to go beyond ourselves and out to others. To have a family is the great countercultural project of our time. And I would say that particularly for you here in London, everything is militating against this choice. I say that as a Londoner myself. I speak from bitter experience. Properties are small. Prices are astronomical. Food and energy prices are off the charts. Schools are terrible or costly, or sometimes costly and terrible. Travel is expensive and impractical. Cars are increasingly impossible to own or use. Community is difficult. And yet this is our mission. Gimli's line from the Lord of the Rings films comes to mind. Certainty of death, small chance of success. What are we waiting for? The practical difficulties are real. Yet we have a God whose very currency is the miraculous and the impossible. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. I know too many families for whom this has been true over and over again. So let's put the easy stuff to one side and move on to the difficult stuff. So first of all, you need to find someone to join you in this countercultural project. They don't need to agree with you on every micro step of the way, but you need to agree on the basic outcome. Leave some space for what my wife and I call creative tensions and arguments, and it's a spectacle to see what God will do with two willing helpers. Because along the way, you'll need to take decisions that maybe your kids won't love, be it about phones or computers or sleepovers or schools or parties, and you'll need to count on each other for strength and steadfastness. So realize that this is a joint project, a project that you need to be able to kind of see in the future where you want to get to. Then all the details, all the things that can happen in a life, we know all sorts of things can happen, all sorts of things can go wrong, all sorts of things cannot go according to plan. But we know where we would like to get to if God wills it. At this point, I'd like to say especially a word to the men in the room. You may be familiar with a Swiss study from the 1990s on the continued practice of religion from children in Christian households. They looked at the kind of relative success of households where one or two of the parents practiced. And this was what came out in this long-term study, that if only the mother practices, in this case, only 2% of the children would regularly practice. If both mother and father practice, then 33% of the children practiced regularly. But the really shocking number was that if only the father practices, then 44% of the children will end up practicing. I spoke once to, my wife founded an apostolate for Catholic mothers, and I once spoke to a large gathering of Catholic mums and suggested to them that the best way for them to increase the chances that their children remained in the faith was for them to stop practicing the faith. Obviously, that's I don't think that went down that well. But anyway, if any men here think that I'll find a good practicing Catholic woman and leave it to her, that ain't going to work. Secondly, I think children need to come into existence in a house of prayer. When it comes to prayer and teaching, you have to start early. You have to start before they can understand, so that for them it's always been there. So you have to start early, very early. I'm not necessarily suggesting grace before breastfeeding, but that wouldn't be a bad idea. In addition, one of the interesting things that came out of the research that Bishop Barron looks at when he talks about the nuns, the people who are neither, who don't have any religion at all. One of the main things that they speak about in what caused them to lose their faith is the problem of unanswered prayer. They prayed, Granny was ill, they prayed for her, she died anyway. So in a sense, a house of prayer that begins early, those kinds of problems can be dealt with kind of at source. They can be spoken about, and children understand that from very early, that we pray, but that we do that not only for ourselves, also to understand what the will of God is. So moments of family prayer and acts of devotion, said Pope Francis in Amoris Laetitia, can be more powerful for evangelization than any catechism class or sermon. The next thing I would speak about is the shortness of the sacramental life of the family, in the sense that as a parent, sometimes you think, okay, we'll get round to the various problems, and there'll be time to speak about things. No, the time in which we have to pass on the faith to our children is incredibly brief. I think that basically, if it hasn't really been done by between that age of sort of 2 and 13, it's almost too late. You're kind of playing catch up. And so you have a very brief window in which to pass on the faith that you have received. And therefore, the sacramental life of the family needs to be absolutely top priority. The sacraments are the ordinary means of salvation. Everything else takes second place. Everything. Sports, school, leisure, everything takes second place to that. Attend the best mass possible as a family. If you have to travel, then travel. Never mind the best schools, never mind the best choir, the best music teacher, the best ballet school. Attend the best mass you possibly can, where the children and you will receive something real, something solid. The other thing I would say that I've found incredibly important is to go to confession as a family. Confession, there's a risk that confession becomes like the sacrament for naughty children. Whereas if you go to confession as a family, and the parents, for example, go first, the children understand this is not a confession. This is not a sacrament for naughty children. This is a sacrament for all the family. That, the parents need forgiveness of God just as much as everybody else. So that I think is really important, to have that kind of priority. The other thing I think that is important is to maintain a certain amount of flexibility. I mean, there's one problem with even these types of talks is that people kind of take them very kind of as like a kind of to-do list. But you have to be flexible. God is very imaginative, and God works in the facts of your life, and things change, and we need to kind of be attentive to what's kind of happening. And I think child-led learning and parenting is one of the stupidest ideas to have come out of a century which made coming up with stupid ideas its kind of specialist subject, except in one thing. God calls us all in slightly different ways. Our souls resonate to different kind of spiritual frequencies. So as parents, we need to be sensitive to what inspires and feeds our children's spiritual life. Last year, we had the great pleasure of meeting and speaking with the parents of Blessed Carlo Acutis. They were not particularly practicing. They were not particularly religious. They are extremely wealthy. I think the father runs one of the biggest insurance companies in Italy. And they gave their son everything he wanted. He liked to go to Assisi, so his parents bought a holiday home in Assisi. He wanted to go to a famous spiritual director in a town 2 hours away. They put their chauffeur at his disposal who would drive him 2 hours there and 2 hours back for confession and spiritual direction. What I mean by this is that if your children show interest, encourage it, find out about it. In our own family, pro-life work, the scapula, Latin Mass even, all things which have nourished our family life immensely were not part of our faith life growing up, but were enthusiastically taken up by some of the children. And as parents, we can think that it's all down to us. But this is not the case. I remember listening to a talk about the life of Edith Stein. And she writes, so she grew up in this Jewish household, and she lost her faith at a certain point. And the reason that she lost her faith, she was the younger child of this family, was that her older siblings didn't take the faith seriously. They didn't take the times of prayer seriously. They would mess about. They would take the mick. They wouldn't. And so she saw that religion wasn't something serious, wasn't something to be taken seriously. So the effect of the siblings on each other can be incredibly important. In fact, sometimes I've spoken to my younger children about their faith, about what's been important to their development, and it's been quite kind of slightly disappointing to hear that their older brothers were kind of more important to them even than the parents. But in the end, I got over it. The important thing is the project. So the next thing I think, and I think this is absolutely fundamental, is creating a culture. So we can be in no doubt that there is a clash of cultures going on today. The world in which we live is not neutral towards the faith and will not allow you to pass on Catholic values unquestioned. In fact, the world around us is constantly communicating a very different, diametrically opposed message, using the slickest, shiniest, best funded, most entertaining and most addictive media at their disposal. How can we compete? Who can resist? An individual? Certainly not. In fact, another thing that the sort of Bishop Barron kind of look into the nuns found was that the moment at which most young people lost their faith was when they were kind of separated from the family, went off to live on their own, for example, at university. So once separated off, it was easier for the world to catechize the children properly. So, who can resist? An individual? Probably not. The nuclear family, with great difficulty, even a large nuclear family will struggle to create a culture. I think the answer lies in larger family groups which can create and sustain their own culture. This may be unfashionable to say, but fortunately as Catholics we have a great tradition of encouraging large families. And why? Because there is strength in numbers. To create a culture, we need a critical mass which can begin to create its own gravitational field. This is something my own family has tried to do in Catford. There are 45 Finaldis who live within walking distance of each other in this little town in the little area of southeast London, providing ample opportunities for celebration, prayer, help and support. People around us find it strange, but also are drawn to it. As Christians, we need to be weird. We may be different, but that's because we have discovered something precious. And the bigger the family, often the better it is at welcoming and absorbing new people. Of course, circumstances mean that not everyone can always slot into this kind of family clan structure, but perhaps you are called to be the beginning of one. Or, as Pope Francis recently said, we must remember that the church is a family of families. So what is a family culture? It's the we of the Bible over the atomized I of Enlightenment liberal individualism. My favorite verse of the Bible are the words of Joshua. As the people of Israel enter the promised land, he recounts the great deeds of the Lord, through the time in the desert. And despite Israel's faithlessness, he remembers all the times that God helped them, that God did the impossible for them. And before going into the promised land, he asked the people of Israel to choose again, idolatry or God. And before waiting for their answer, he says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So strengthened by his example, the rest of Israel follow suit. This is the power of we. We see things differently. We do things differently. We have a mission. What is a family if not the joint project of a husband and wife, which is taken up and renewed by their children and their children's children? Sons are a gift from the Lord. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are the sons of one's youth. Happy the man who has his quiver full of them. He will not fear when enemies arrive. Thank you.